Hello, moi nui, and welcome to the Bureau Asia podcast. I'm Matt Cowan, the Bureau Chief, and your host, coming to you from a toasty Ho Chi Minh. It feels like there's a change of season blowing in the breeze as we move from the rainy season, or mua mua, into the dry, or mua ka. Doesn't sound as good, does it? Mua mua is rainy season, of course, and mua ka is dry season. It's been a little while since our last episode. I feel like I say this every episode now, but that's the way it is. Both Mel and I have been pretty busy with other things, so much so that she's not going to join me today in this episode, or join us, I should say. In fact, for the next few, she's not going to be able to join us.
Dude,
like I often say, she's actually got a real job. I know. How could it take priority over this? Sitting here with me, chatting to you. Oh, well, it's all about the cash, isn't it? Sadly, my offer wasn't enough. Just a heads up, I'm going to present this episode a little differently because I don't have the luxury of bantering with Mel. So this isn't, well, I will when she gets home, but not right now. So this isn't going to be what you're used to. In fact, if you've watched my latest video on my YouTube channel, you'll recognise the content, although I've adapted this podcast episode a little bit to better suit this format. Plus, there's a guest coming up on this episode that doesn't appear in the video. So there you go, a little bonus for you to stick around in case you've watched the video and think there's nothing new for you here. By the way, make sure you check out the video and the channel. Just search the Bureau Asia on YouTube and it should pop up. Subscribe and share if you like it. If you don't, well, don't. Anyway, as for this episode, I hope you like it. And as always, let me know somehow, perhaps with a review on the platform you're listening on or in the Facebook group at the Bureau Asia. Anyway, here goes. Wish me luck. It's just you and me. Well, we've heard it all before, haven't we? Vietnam's cheap, the beer's cheap, food's cheap, and the people, well, they're just so nice, aren't they? But is everything in Vietnam really as good as everyone says it is? Of course it isn't. So in this episode, I'm going to give you the good, the bad, and what I call the phởgly about Vietnam. I hope you like that. So that you're prepared and your Vietnam trip doesn't get ruined. Okay, let's get into it. Well, we've got to start with the good, don't we? After all, that's what the thumbnail says for this episode. Beer lovers, this one's for you. You'll be happy to know Vietnam loves beer. In fact, last year, the Vietnamese drank 4.8 billion litres of the stuff. Yeah, that's right. You heard me right. 4.8 billion litres. And I worked it out a little bit earlier. It's equivalent to something like 1,920 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So I don't know if you can imagine that in your head, but that's a shitload of beer. In fact, that's 48 beers for every man, woman and child in Vietnam for the entire year. Now, keep in mind that there's something like 100 million people that live here. No wonder nothing much makes sense here. Hey, and if you think 4.8 billion litres is a lot, it's forecast that by 2027, the Vietnamese will drink 8 billion litres of it. That's just 4 years away. Now, lager is by far and away the most popular beer style here in Vietnam, accounting for basically the entire market. And the brand enjoying the lion's share is, well, Tiger, who enjoys a 28% share of the market, followed by Saigon Export at 14.1%, then Bar Export at 11.3%, and so on. Now, just a useless little piece of trivia to add to that, the beer during the war was called Bar, and then after the war, they added another 3 to it. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you tried any of them and what you thought. So what about craft beer? How's its market share? Well, Vietnam is often regarded as the mecca of craft beer in Southeast Asia, if not Asia. How about that? Yet, despite that reputation, craft beer consumption only represents 0.2%. Yep, no need to adjust your volume. You heard me right. Just 0.2% of the market. But it is increasing. Well, slightly. It's up from 0.1% in 2021. But things aren't all flat for craft beer brands in Vietnam because almost 10 million litres a year get drunk here. And considering it's a premium drink on average selling for around $5 per glass, often more, when local lagers might be about $1, that still makes it a $50 million US a year industry, give or take. And what's more, the foreseeable future is set to see a growing demand for premium beers like it, in line with an increasing disposable income in Vietnam. In particular, it's expected middle-class urban professionals will be more willing to pay more for higher quality products with a superior taste. And this is how craft beer brands hope to cash in. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, Asia's largest and most respected craft brewing conference, BrewAsia, was held right here in Ho Chi Minh City at the Gem Centre. And it proves that craft beer isn't a fad that's going away anytime soon. Brands from no less than 12 countries in the region attended the two-day conference, with more than 30 awards handed out to the best beers in their categories as part of the conference's Asia Beer Championship. And get this, Vietnam ranked number 3 in brewing excellence behind South Korea and China. Not a bad effort given the industry here is less than 10 years old. And joining me to talk a little bit about the beer drinking scene here and throughout Southeast Asia is Kuala Lumpur-based digital strategist and, I've got to say, mega beer geek, Ollie Woods. How are you, Ollie? Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Cool. Let's talk beer. So what was the highlight of BrewAsia this year?
Oh, mate, it was a fantastic event. You know, I've got to say it's one of the highlights of my annual calendar. So much fun catching up with old friends, making some new friends, trying out some beers, learning a lot. I mean, for me, the highlight is really the camaraderie of the industry and getting to see, chat with people from all around the world, from the US to New Zealand to China to Japan to India. And it's, for me, a highlight is it gives you a bit of a temperature check around what's going on, what various, challenges different markets are facing, what are the common challenges. And it really gives you a time to talk strategy and plan for the year ahead. And presumably taste a bit of beer. That's definitely one of the upsides of a beer conference.
So in my little preamble to this conversation, I said that Vietnam's craft beer industry was worth $50 million US a year. Now, it was a guess, of course, most likely a bad guess and definitely uninformed. So what do you think it's actually valued at?
So, look, I think it's always a difficult one to try and estimate craft beer market size in a lot of Southeast Asian and generally in a lot of Southeast Asian countries. No one really knows. A lot of the research in the region doesn't, people like IWSR, the Institute of Wine and Spirits Research, their coverage of craft beer is pretty limited. I spent a lot of time in Malaysia, for instance, and they barely cover craft beer because it's a relatively small category. Look, I think it's possible that it's worth a bit more than 50 million. Right. I think it's fluctuated a lot. I'd say before 2019, it may have been worth something a little more than that. I mean, I guess part of it depends on how you determine. Is that revenue by all the craft breweries? Is that brand valuation? Is that, there's a few different aspects to it.
Yep.
I mean, and essentially, but look, I do think that 50 million is probably not a bad guess.
Wow.
Look, it might be, honestly, I mean, no one really knows. And I think, again, if someone has really solid data, I believe it. I know that the thing is, you look at the overall beer market size in Vietnam. I think the last time I checked, I know Statista was saying the estimate was about 5 billion. It was about 5 billion, and it's predicted to be 5 billion in 2023.
Right. And
if you think that, craft beer is definitely a fraction of a percent of that, right?
Yep.
In Vietnam, it's a small fraction of a percent, sub 0.5 for sure.
Yep.
Particularly right now. Then again, we'll find out the stats. The stats for the year will tend to come out sooner. But look, it's a mug's game trying to work out what it's worth. The big breweries always try and say that it's worth absolutely nothing.
Right.
The craft beer industry has a vested interest trying to make it sound larger. I would be curious to see where the kind of chips fall in the next year or two, because right now it is a really stressful time for Vietnam's craft beer industry. For the beer industry in general, it's been a really tough 12 months. in Vietnam in particular, but all over the world, it's challenging. You know, in New Zealand, for instance, several breweries have gone under in the last 6 months, most recently Deep Creek. Even in Vietnam, a couple of brewery names, smaller ones, have sort of faded off or have stopped active production. So yeah, look, it's a bit of it's sort of guesswork at the moment, but certainly it's not in the hundreds of millions. Let's put it that way.
Right. Now you're just back from Vietnam, of course, because you're involved in the organisation of Brew Asia 2023, which was held here at the Gem Centre in Ho Chi Minh City. Did you notice anything different about the craft beer scene since you were here last?
So yeah, I mean, reiterating my kind of point, I do think it seems like Vietnam is going through a period of consolidation right now. It seems like, it's been obviously COVID did a number on the entire beer, on the kind of the entire beer industry. Originally, I think people were predicting it for beer sales to hugely surge. A kind of standard feature of economic downturns. I mean, again, it's not always something that happens, but it's common as people downtrade, right, to cheaper drinks, cheaper beverages. And so I think that's definitely hit everybody, particularly in the craft beer space, because craft beer in Vietnam is more expensive than commercial macro beer, right? Like from the likes of Habaco and Sabaco. What I would say is, yeah, there's just an air of consolidation at the moment. I think, it's not a pessimistic atmosphere, but it's not an optimistic one either. I think people are now trying to find ways of making things work. I do think there's a bit of a return to kind of, back to basics approach around ensuring good quality products, around ensuring, control of your own tap rooms and control of your own supply chain, and making sure that, because so many venues have shut down, right, in the last 3 years, and that's continuing. Venue closures are continuing. And that's something that's happening again in a lot of countries. So yeah, look, it's honestly, man, I'd say it's a period of flux for the industry. It's a period of it's a challenging time. But from what I would say is the breweries are taking it in their stride. They're coming up with new strategies, new sales strategies, new branding strategies. So people are really thinking toward next year and really trying to think about how they can grow. And not just maintain. That's the take that I got from chatting with people in the market.
And what about in terms of the consumer or consumer trends? What are Vietnamese people tending to turn to in craft beer?
So this is something that's always a big debate, right? And it was early on when craft beer was growing in Vietnam and long before pre-COVID, like when sort of the initial boom time happened. From 2016 to 2019, what you saw was a sort of a couple of different tiers of craft breweries. You sort of saw kind of mass distribution ones. Breweries like Platinum did very well, scaling out in kind of beer gardens. Then you kind of saw the more premium tap room driven breweries like Pasteur Street, Heart of Darkness, Seven Bridges. So what it seems like right now is, yeah, look, people are down. Cost is definitely a factor, right? People are down trading. But if you look at Heineken's annual report from earlier this year, Vietnam was cited as one of the most disappointing markets. So it's interesting because it isn't a clear story of down trading. What I'm seeing is it's becoming very, very. The market is becoming very, very competitive for Vietnamese drinkers. Yeah, price is obviously a really important factor. As I'm sure you've touched on this before in your other podcasts. It's a bit of a challenging time in the economy as well. There's layoffs going on across all sectors. So yeah, the price is one big driver. The other thing is, I do think that. Maybe this is a controversial opinion, but as someone who's lived in Vietnam and on and off for, more than 6 years, spent a lot of time drinking beers with Vietnamese friends. I find a distinction between, the idea that foreigners prefer to drink certain styles and Vietnamese prefer to drink certain styles can be a bit of an arbitrary discussion. Sometimes, yeah, like I guess traditionally the idea was you always needed a beer vang and a beer, a beer den, right? Like a black beer and a golden beer.
Yep.
And that's what sort of used to get at the likes of Hoa Bien and what some people still do, some breweries still do very well in like Brouhaha and in the central region. And and Louisiana Brewhouse and some of the smaller, more traditional breweries.
Right.
But one thing that's interesting that I see is, I do think, going back several years, breweries that really nail fruit beers have done quite well. So, obviously fruit and sort of beers with strong, bold flavors. And I think, back in the day, you have to credit Pasteur Street's Jasmine IPA. That was a real crowd pleaser across the Vietnamese and expat/tourist market. But also, you look at Heart of Darkness with a lot of their kind of hazies have done very well with the Vietnamese, done very well with the Vietnamese crowd. Yeah, I mean, look, obviously IPAs are a constant factor.
Yep.
The other ones that are interesting is, everyone's also kind of been making their lager clones, Vietnamese lager clones, like Beer Oi from Seven Bridges, beer from Heart of Darkness, Goldwater from Pasteur Street. So, yeah, sorry, that's a bit of a long answer, but I guess it's something I sit around and think about a lot, and I drink a fair amount with Vietnamese people. So it is always interesting. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that as well, and whether you kind of find a similar story.
I've noticed that beers are definitely lower in alcohol. They seem to be what's on the market compared to what was, pre-COVID. So it seems like that breweries are trying to cater more for that local market, which prefers that lower alcohol. And like you said, perhaps more local fruits and local flavors and stuff like that. I mean, they're always changing, aren't they? I mean, you go into a craft beer place and there's always something new on the menu, and they're just sort of trying things out constantly.
Yeah, it's very dynamic. And that's one thing I think that I think New Zealand and Vietnam actually are quite similar beer markets. Markets that really prize variety, and people really love being able to choose, like a variety of flavors. I mean, go to beer crafts in District 3 or District 2, any night of the week or on one side, and you'll see people trying, you'll get the people getting the beer towers, the sort of office workers knocking off from law firms and tech companies. But you'll also get, young Vietnamese people in their 20s and 30s just trying out a range of different beers, taking Instagram photos with them, different bright colors. I mean, one brewery on that note that's doing some really interesting work is Deme. And Deme has been, they did a really beautiful rose-colored beer recently, Roselle beer, and they've actually just done a beautiful Radler, which is super refreshing. So yeah, look, I do think, I've got to say, and if any craft beer people listening to me are kind of dismissing what I'm saying, I mean, a very practical example is when you're in, I spent a lot of time in Singapore and Malaysia, and mate, I tell you what, coming back to Vietnam is such a treat because I know I can try, 50 different beer styles. I've only been back for 6 months. I can go everywhere and try new stuff. Whereas, frankly speaking, mate, in Singapore, Malaysia, I love these two countries, but there's just a lot less variation, both in terms of style and in terms of style, really, and in terms of variety. Yeah.
Just before we move on to the next question, the controversial one, low alcohol beer, craft beer. I throw that up every now and then on the Vietnam craft beer Facebook page, and it's always an interesting little discussion. It always sparks discussion. What are your thoughts on it, specifically in Vietnam?
So look, specifically in Vietnam, I think huge opportunity. I think it needs. I'm a branding and marketing guy. That's my background. I was in that before beer. I think it's a product subcategory, whatever you call it, that needs good marketing, good branding, a big sales push, and it needs to taste good. I think those are the criteria. And some people have actually really cracked it. Hop Rising, the beautiful, very beautiful. It was called New Wave. Both they had it on draft and in bottle during COVID. That was just after COVID, actually, after things got really bad. That was really beautiful. They did a really good job, and all the other breweries, lots of people might not know this, have done testing, and I've managed to be lucky enough to try a bunch of the ones. I won't name which breweries, but some of the bigger ones have done tests with them, and some of them have been really beautiful and fantastic. Yes, there are challenges around hygiene. That's one big challenge. Some of the smaller breweries aren't, alcohol and hops and there's a bunch of other stuff as part of the brewing process that makes, higher ABVs or, regular strength beer have less, problems in terms of food safety. Low alcohol beer, that is an issue, and that's something that does need to be considered. But look, I in the long run, keeping it simple, a huge opportunity. People have just got to get the flavor right, got to get the marketing right and the branding right. One trend, if you allow me to branch to Vietnam's northern neighbor, China, one trend that happened in China and that's now happening in Vietnam is after China's government passed stricter drink driving rules, which several years ago, they did it a few years ahead of Vietnam. Alcohol consumption, it really impacted alcohol consumption trends.
Right.
And it reduced, people, for instance, going to bars, consumption goes down.
Yep.
And there was a recent research report by a think tank in Vietnam that looked at the sort of trend by one of the consultancies rather, not a think tank, that was sort of showing that sort of the trend. And I see a huge opportunity, and most of the craft beer industry people disagree with me about this, but I think there's a huge opportunity to come in.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be zero. It can be low, sort of touching on what you said before. It can be lower ABV. It can be 1%, 2%, 3% beers. And I think there's a huge opportunity. I just think someone needs to take it by the horns and make the liquid great, and then sell it and market it like hell.
Plus, we're getting older. It's harder to drink that heavier stuff when you get older. That's my secret bias. Things have really changed for me in the last, sort of 3 to 5 years as I've got older. And as you said, Vietnam brought in the zero blood alcohol law as well. So, I'm very mindful of that these days. Just on this topic, in terms of distribution, I went to my local convenience store the other day. Can't remember which one it is. Is it 7-Eleven? Just downstairs. And I could only find 2 brands of beer in there, whereas probably a year or so ago, I think I could have had, chosen from about 7. So I don't know whether it was a supply thing or whatever that the shelves hadn't been stocked, but it looked like some of the brands that were in there have moved out of the convenience store area. Yeah, so convenience stores are a funny one, right? I mean, that's a whole nother conversation about. I love convenience stores, and I love the economics of them, or the bad economics of them. We know where to find you.
Yeah, you'll find me hanging out in 7-Elevens and Circle K's. It's an interesting one. So, 2 things. What I found curious was during COVID, when I was stuck in Saigon, obviously we had limited places to go, right? And I know you and I ran into each other in Vung Tau a couple of times,
yep.
Eating some bun cot and hanging out with our mutual Vietnamese mate who he loves to go swimming in the evenings. But one thing I noticed in convenience stores, even in Vung Tau in Baria, you could actually get a bunch of different craft beers. And part of me thought that's great, but then part of me thought, where's the sales and marketing support? I mean, you can't just pop up in a convenience store and expect to sell. And that's one of the other things, right? I mean, convenience stores aren't necessarily, the average convenience store in Vietnam is not a huge growth engine. A lot of it, part of it's a real estate play, part of it's a branding play, a lot of it's long term. Again, there's a lot of pieces besides beer in there, but yeah, my feel probably is some of the breweries sort of did a big punch into the convenience stores, maybe didn't get the sales they wanted. Maybe the convenience stores weren't particularly stoked with the level of sales either. They didn't fly off the shelves.
Right.
And the other component in all this is, Heineken and Sabeco and Carlsberg aren't sitting idly. They aren't just sitting around. And so they're putting pressure on the convenience stores as well to try and stock more of their products, probably giving them discounts, doing all sorts of financial arrangements that makes it more attractive for convenience stores. And, Carlsberg, for instance, now has taken over Pasteur Street Brewing Company's distribution. So, maybe, I don't know if you saw Pasteur Street in there, but that might be something you see a bit more of with Carlsberg and Carlsberg cans or their brands alongside Pasteur Street, for instance, in the kind of convenience store, quick service retail channels.
Yeah, the ones I saw were Rooster and East West.
Yeah, so both Rooster and East West, I've got to say that, I mean, out of curiosity, were they cans or bottles?
Yeah, cans.
Yeah, so both Rooster and East West, Heart of Darkness as well, have all been pretty aggressive with can distribution, and they've done quite well. I know Rooster, from a demographic perspective, Rooster's really done really well and really kept things moving. I really credit Rooster, Don and the rest of the team there. They've done a really good job at cranking out their distribution, getting their cans out into the market. They've really doubled down on cans. And besides their taproom network, I've got to say, I think they've done a really wonderful job of building their brands. So I'm not surprised to hear that they were in there. Yeah.
There's one in Vungtau now as well. So
That's right. Yeah.
Meet up there.
Sounds like a plan. Let me know the dates and I'll be there.
Well, that might answer the fifth question I've got, which is what's your forecast for the next 4 to 5 years? Meet up with me at the Rooster Tap Room in Vungtau. So
Daniel.
yeah. So just quickly, what would your forecast be for Vietnam? You've answered probably pretty much all of that in the previous questions, but just just a last sort of point on future growth forecast for Vietnam.
I think what you'll see is more consolidation. I think the lines between bigger breweries and smaller breweries will kind of maybe dissolve a little bit. There'll be more acquisitions by big breweries or partnership deals similar to the Carlsberg and Pasteur Street arrangement. There's so many rumors in the market in the last few years about buyouts and partnerships. But I definitely think there's going to be more consolidation. What I also think you're going to see is the market stratify. So what I think you'll see is right now you sort of always had, small craft breweries and the big boys. What I think now you'll start seeing is probably the big boys starting to try and play into craft beer, and that's already very much happening. I think you'll see some of the medium-sized craft breweries partner, do some kinds of arrangement or grow a lot. There are some of the breweries are exporting. A number of the breweries in Vietnam are doing very well overseas. I think Heart of Darkness right now is the largest distribution, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore.
Wow.
Then I think one small positive thing for the future that I'm seeing, and I saw this at Brew Asia, is that there's a lot of small little breweries popping up, or ones that are maybe rebranding. So there's Eddie Chu's brand, which is I think Gao Den, 3T, Sweetwater, Deme I already mentioned before. One of my friends, Cheeky, who's Vietnamese, he calls it the new wave of Vietnamese craft beer, and I very much think that will blossom, and that's going to create a really exciting segment of kind of taproom culture, really small microbreweries. We can go in there and explore a bit like going back to the days in 2016.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's going to be both, but stratified, bit of a change in the market dynamics.
Okay, cool. And finally, Brew Asia 2024. It's going to be held in Singapore in October next year. What can attendees expect? And will you be able to top Heart of Darkness's end of conference party that featured 2 live bands and some pro wrestling, if we can call it that, in a massive warehouse in the back blocks of District 7?
Matt, I think you just laid down the gauntlet to the Singaporean brewers and Brew Asia's organisers. I think it's going to be, obviously it'll be a lot of fun. Singapore is always a great city to visit. I think it's going to be a big challenge though to top for the brewers to top that. I hear that they're already plotting the Singapore, the craft brewers are plotting to try and do something more exciting. So I'm quite excited to see what they've got planned. But no, look, it'll be a great conference. And for anyone who's listening, who's either in the beer industry or adjacent to it, working in food and beverage, look, Brew Asia is awesome. It's such a fun learning experience. It isn't just a huge piss up, so there is definitely an aspect of that. But the connections you make, it's besides brewers, you get everyone from, there's a huge journalistic contingent there. I mean, my company, Beer Asia, we were a media partner, and there's the beer award, so you get to meet people from the Asia Beer Championship. Oh, mate, it's a huge amount of fun, and you meet distributors, you meet journalists, business people, manufacturers. There's a whole ingredient supply chain, manufacturing supply chain there. It's really an interesting experience, and I'd really encourage anyone listening in to come over to Singapore, and hopefully, there can be something to top that night night of debauched Vietnam pro wrestling and live music.
It would have to go next level, wouldn't it? If to top that off, it was a pretty awesome night, and I must admit, I think I sneaked out before it got too out of control.
Good call. That's always the pro tip during Brew Asia.
All right, Ollie, thanks heaps for taking time out of your, do you call it beer drinking or sampling? Beer sampling to join me.
Market visit. Appreciate it, Matt. I really enjoyed the chat, and looking forward to catching up, whether in Saigon or Vung Tau, really soon. Cheers.
Sounds great. Cheers.
Everybody say, don't get down.
That was Ollie Woods, and you can get in touch with him via his website, asiabrewersnetwork.com. I'll leave it in the show notes, and you'll find all of his social media there, and you can connect that way. Now, make sure you check the description for the list of craft breweries I recommend in Saigon. Okay, so we've got the good out of the way. Now it's time for the
Bad.
Well, Vietnam's known for being pretty safe for travellers, save for the odd motorbike or bus accident and the odd broken heart here or there. It can sometimes be the food that can ruin a Vietnam trip. Funny thing is, Vietnam is known for its great food, dishes like pho, spring rolls and goat. Yes, goat. It's actually very common here to go out and eat goat at a goat place, believe it or not, and it's often eaten as a hot pot known as lao ye. Anyway, these dishes have put Vietnam on the global culinary map. Well, okay, maybe not goat, but most definitely pho and goi gun, aka fresh spring rolls, have. But one other dish that hit the headlines in Vietnam recently is banh mi. The French-style baguette filled with pâté, mayo, mystery meats and salad that everyone seems to want to try when they come here and be the ones who've discovered the best. And rightly so, they're damn tasty, but not just any old banh mi caused the stir, or should I say bellyache, a little while ago. Actually, a rather large bellyache for no less than 141 people, 33 of which were foreign tourists. And the offending banh mi's weren't just from any old random banh mi joint either. They happened to be from Banh Mi Phung in Hoi An.
I'm a bad bitch every day of the week. If I hop up on the mic, they gon' play it on repeat. Cash 100
What made this shit story hit the headlines was that Banh Mi Phung owes her fame to the late Anthony Bourdain, who's said to have discovered her. Well, yeah, that's another story for another time. Anyway, he did put her on the map and she's cashed in ever since, to the tune of, according to a recent Vietcetera report, 1 billion Vietnam dong per month. That's a lazy 40 grand US or so. What was actually discovered by food inspectors was that samples from Banh Mi Phung contain bacteria like salmonella that can and does clearly lead to serious food poisoning. Hey, that wasn't me. Oh, that's right. Mel's not here. I can't blame her. Now, nasty bacteria like salmonella was found in samples of mystery meats, which is a generic term for the assortment of bologna that's often found in banh mi because of its dubious origins. The sarsu pork, you might know it as char siu. The siu mai, aka shu mai, the little pork meatballs, often in a tomato sauce, and the vegetables. The health inspectors that shut down the popular shop, which had reportedly sold over 1,900 banh mi on the day reports of food poisoning began to flow in, said that the preparation area didn't meet hygiene requirements and the cooked and uncooked ingredients had been stored together. So what now for Banh Mi Phung, who's been in operation for 34 years? Well, as of this week, the shop remains closed while Phung's reputation online has been soiled. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. So how does this affect someone like you who might be considering travelling here to Vietnam? Well, in cases like this, there's really nothing you can do. You're really putting your trust and your health in the hands of strangers who may or may not be taking food hygiene seriously. But there are things you can do to mitigate the risk of picking up the dreaded Saigon squirts. Like just about everyone, the Vietnamese are creatures of habit, and this is particularly so when it comes to meal times. They like to eat around the same time of day every day of the week. Typically, breakfast starts from sunup even earlier in some cases, but tends to end around 9 a.m. or, as is most common, until the food runs out. Don't expect to find much fresh breakfast stuff around mid-morning. Same goes for lunch. Usually you'll have a window between 11:30 to 1 p.m, and after that, your freshest options will have probably run out. So the moral of the story is, eat when the locals are eating at the places they're eating at, and stick to what look like popular places, and eat where there's flame or things that are constantly on the boil. Then you should be all right. Oh, and make sure you're covered for any hospital visits. Make sure your insurance is up to date. But it's good to know that if you eat something and then sometime later things start to suddenly feel a bit loose down there or thereabouts, if you know what I mean, the pharmacies here sell just about everything over the counter. Okay, so I've given you the good and the bad. Now I'm going to give you the phởgly. Now, just a quick explanation on what the phởgly means. It's a bit of a combination of a couple of words like pho, for example, the noodle soup here, and ugly or fugly. So it's a little bit of a play on those words. I guess a portmanteau is another word for that. Now, let's see. The steps when planning a trip, they go something like this. You choose a destination and then see what the flight schedule's like going to that destination and their prices, and then perhaps look for accommodation. You know, you might search Agoda or Booking.com or something like that. Now, destinations like Ho Chi Minh City have tons of accommodation options to choose from dingy, rat-infested dorms in the backpacker area. A few of us have stayed in those, to opulent, some might say gaudy 5-star hotels like the Brewery right in town. There's even a space-age looking capsule hotel if you want to escape from the world, or love hotels if you get lucky. But that's the thing about life in this city. It's one of extremes and generally not a lot in between. So let's look at accommodation, for example. A story in the local news recently featured a new rising trend in Ho Chi Minh City: sleep boxes. Yeah, and they look exactly like that, a box that you sleep in. Now, these sleep boxes are around 2 metres by 2 metres and have come about to meet the demands of students, workers and low-income earners looking for cheap, long-term accommodation. Now, just a little profile of Ho Chi Minh City is that it's very much a migrant city. A lot of the people that live here weren't actually born here, so they come here to make money and to find a better life, and then actually when holidays come, they tend to leave the city and go back to their hometown. So they're always looking for cheap accommodation. Now, alarmingly, house owners here have been dividing rooms in their homes and converting them into, well, what some might say are cages, and charging somewhere between $70 to $80 per month. One particular room in a place measuring 20 square metres was found to have 16 sleep boxes for rent. The 1.8 million Vietnam dong monthly rent, as I said, around $70 to $80 a month, includes electricity and water fees. In some cases, floors include a communal bathroom, washing machine, stove, and fridges. But perhaps the most shocking of properties recently discovered was a 516 square metre 5-storey house in Bintan district near the city centre that had been divided into 125 rooms. Fortunately, authorities were onto the massive fire risk with no emergency escapes, nor fire alarms, and a lack of other fire safety systems, and shut it down. What's more, typically motorbikes are parked beneath buildings in Ho Chi Minh City, which in itself poses a serious risk should a fire break out. And these sleep boxes are no different. The frightening thing is no one knows exactly how many of these sleep boxes exist, making it hard for the authorities to crack down on them. This comes as an electrical fault on a motorbike parked beneath a small apartment block in Hanoi caught fire last September, leading to the death of 56 people who were unable to escape the blaze. It was found afterwards that the building had been approved as a 6-storey house, but had subsequently been converted into a 10-storey mini apartment building with 45 apartments. So what does this have to do with you and your potential trip to Vietnam? Well, a lot. Many travellers come to Vietnam and choose to stay in budget accommodation. Often this kind of accommodation is in densely populated neighbourhoods and alleyways like Pham Nu Lao, where building maintenance and fire prevention is poor. It's also common for travellers to stay in Airbnb properties that are often in French colonial era apartment blocks, with little or no fire evacuation procedures and totally random businesses operating out of them, creating a potentially deadly mix for residents and guests living among them. The same goes for staying in Vietnam's iconic tube houses that typically have just one exit on the ground floor, with windows, usually barred for security, only on the side facing the street. It's not hard to imagine the potential for disaster, is it? In addition, it's long been said that emergency services like the fire department aren't equipped to handle fires in high-rise apartments. A case in point was the devastating fire that engulfed the Carina Plaza apartment complex in District 8, which was home to 700 families back in 2018, where at least 13 people were killed, and it took the fire department more than 2 hours to bring the blaze under control that allegedly started, you guessed it, in the basement parking of the building. At that time, it was reported that more than 1,000 fire incidents occurred in Ho Chi Minh City in the previous year. Fast forward 5 years, and it's been reported this year that in the past 12 months alone across Vietnam, there have been 1,900 fire incidents, leaving 142 people dead. Now that's enough evidence right there to make sure you take fire safety seriously when booking your accommodation in Ho Chi Minh City. Do your best to find out exactly where your accommodation is situated. Is it in a densely populated alleyway? Is it in an old colonial era building? Is it in a high-rise building with little access for emergency services? And what are your options if you need to flee? Now, sorry to spoil your excitement about the planning of your trip to Vietnam, but who knows what might happen in the event of a fire in your accommodation in Vietnam? At least do some research before you commit to staying at a property. It might just save your life. Well, that's it for this episode. I hope it goes some way to ensuring your holiday to Vietnam isn't ruined. And even if you're not contemplating coming to Vietnam at all, I hope you found it entertaining and educational. Make sure you get in touch and let me know your thoughts, opinions and observations, and I'll do my best to reply ASAP. Until then, take care and stay safe, and I'll catch you in the next episode.